Well, all right. Welcome to this video that we're going to do on hazards and risks. One of the most important things when you start off and you look at different, I guess it probably wouldn't really matter which site you look at. They go through certain steps. So the image we're looking at now, it's from the Canadian preparedness sites, and basically your step one is know what your risks are. Now, not just risks, but it starts off with the hazards, and that's what we're going to be talking about in this presentation. Step two would be to then make a plan. We'll talk about that in future presentations. Step three, get a kit. So really basic. If you do those three basic things, you'll be fairly well covered. So we're going to look at hazards and risks. So what are hazards? Hazard is any source of potential harm to you, property, or the environment. So basically something that has the potential to hurt you. Risks, well, risks are generally thought about as negative or unpleasant events, loss, injuries. It's basically uncertainty about the consequences or likelihood of something happening. But now risks can be good as well. They're not always bad. So for example, the presentation where I did this last night at our local community hall, this presentation, and I put out a certain number of chairs. I had more chairs. I thought, oh, should I put out some more chairs? Now the risk is that more people show up and then we're delayed because I've got to put more chairs out. And that's exactly what happened. So that was a positive, right? I was uncertain about how many people would show up. I looked to the past and I said, well, based on past numbers, this is what I'm expecting. Now the impact, if more people turn up, well, we have to get more chairs. So how did I mitigate that impact? I brought another stack of chairs in and I just left them in the back of the room. I didn't take them out of the stack though, because I thought it'll be easy for me to put the stack back afterwards, and if we need them, they're here. So I can mitigate that, and sure, that happened. So we did that. Risks, again, can be positive or negative, and it's usually calculated by taking your probability and multiply that by the impact. So should the event occur, what's the probability of that occurring and what's the impact? And that allows you to rank and prioritize with limited resources what you're going to focus on. Mitigation. So mitigation, or putting in controls, it's basically decreasing either the probability that an event will happen or the impact should that event happen. Now, some examples. So let's look at those. Wearing a seatbelt. It's a control and it decreases the impact. If I put my seatbelt on, that probably won't change the likelihood that I'm in an accident, but it should decrease the impact or the consequences to me if I am in an accident. Now, if I reduce my speed while driving, that both decreases the probability that I'll be in an accident because it gives more reaction time for both myself and others. And it also will decrease the impact because at lower speeds, there's less energy, so the impact will be less. So some controls or mitigations decrease probability, some decrease impact, and some decrease both. The four big types of mitigation, you're either going to accept a risk, avoid it, transfer it, or reduce it. Or another way is the 4T's, saying we either treat it, which is reducing it in what we see on the screen here, or mitigating it. We treat, we transfer, which is transfer is offloading the risk or sharing the risk with someone else. The most common way to do that would be through insurance. So we're transferring the risk, for example, of a house fire to the insurance company. We take part of the risk with our deductible. We still have things that we have to do here to be safe in our home, but the big risk that would be super hard for us to absorb, we transfer that. Some people want to think they transfer the risk of a break-in to the police, and we'll let the police do all that. Well, that's a risk in and of itself. So we treat, we transfer, we can tolerate a risk, which in this example here is accepting it, just saying, hey, I'm not going to do anything at all about it, and should it happen, I just accept it. Or we terminate it, or we basically avoid or stop doing whatever that is. So how do I know what my hazards are? Well, there's different ways to do it. Um, you could look at what's happened before, either on your own personal experience or if you're new to an area or wanting to find out about the area you're in, looking and talking with people with what's happened before. So job loss. So for me, for example, I've had 2 or 3 occasions where I thought my position was secure. I was in a permanent spot. I thought I'm loyal, the company will be loyal. And lo and behold, no, it's not. Doesn't matter if you're doing great work, doesn't matter any of those things, you can suddenly be without job. So I've had that happen a couple of times. So that's something that I pay particular attention to. Power failures. When I moved out to my new place here, my acreage, and we first got here, and I started talking to the neighbors, meeting the neighbors, saying, "Hey, what's the frequency that we have power outages here? How long do they normally last?" You can find information online too about power outages, so you can look that stuff up. Fire. Have you had fires before in your vehicle, in your home, on your property, in adjacent properties? Do you know people that have had fires, right? There are certain key contingencies that we should be prepared for and expect. Animal encounters. How often have you um, hit an animal while driving or almost hit or been hit by an animal? Have you had encounters with aggressive animals where you live when you're out walking yourself or with pets? Have you ever encountered some of that stuff? So look at that past experience. Maybe your neighbor said, "Yeah, we just lost some chickens to a fox." Okay, there you go. There's some concrete examples. Theft. Have you been a victim of theft, vandalism, burglary, assault, floods? Do you live in a floodplain? Are you close to a river? Are you in a valley? Talk to your neighbors. Look on websites. Use Risk Ready 101. Um, I look at all this stuff quite frequently, so if you have questions about your area or want to know some resources, give me a shout. We can talk about it. Here's an example of hazard identification or risk assessment. So now we're not going to get into what's behind the scores or determining that level, but you can see here where this one is from. They said, well, forest fire, wildfire is our most extreme and highest scoring risk. Then they ranked floods, vehicular accidents, tornado, wind, floods from rainfall or runoff, hazmat incidents, and down and down and down. So this gives you a starting point to say, let's focus on this first versus that. Hazards, risks, and controls. So let's look at the example. A tornado is a hazard. It can actually cause damage to me, property, the environment. What are the risks involved with a tornado, though? Well, you might say, well, there's a risk that we lose power due to that tornado. Okay. There's a risk that the house could be demolished or property damage. There's a risk that our access could be impaired. Maybe nothing happens to my home, but I can't get out or people can't get in. So that makes the risks of other things higher, because if I then have a subsequent medical emergency, it's going to be tough for me to get to a hospital or anyone to get in to help me. So how can we mitigate or control that? Well, for power outages, we could say, well, I've got solar panels and batteries if the grid goes down. I've got a backup generator if I lose power. If the house is in jeopardy of collapsing around me, I have a safe room that I can get to. Means of egress, just like when we do our 2 ways out of every room for fire escape and home evacuation. Plan for 2 ways out of your neighborhood, 2 ways off your property, 2 ways out of your community, your province, right? Look at that and plan ahead for it to help mitigate that. What about a fox? Fox is a hazard. It can hurt me. So there's a risk is that I or one of my family members get bitten by the fox. Maybe the fox kills my chickens. Maybe the fox attacks my pets. Those are risks of having that fox around. How can I control that? Well, I could shoot the fox. I could build more robust protection for my chickens. Putting the wire and the fencing into the ground, either out from it or underground, having very strong protection there. I could have a large protective dog on my property. I could have fencing around areas I don't want foxes to get into as easily to help deter or delay them or prevent them from getting in. So what about for me personally? What are my hazards? Well, I look at wildlife. Um, Now, the area I live in, I contacted them and asked what their prime uh, hazards would be. Wildlife did not show up on it. But for me, bear, cougar, wolves, coyotes, fox. What about mice, voles, moles? They go after my garden. Birds. I lost a lot of my Saskatoon berries to birds last year. Moose, wasps, right? Look at your particular, are you allergic to bee stings? Well, bees are a hazard for you. Now, I don't like getting stung, but uh, my vulnerability or the threat to me is not as high from bees because I am not currently allergic to them. Mice could get after your food. They could spread disease. So you don't just look at maybe necessarily what impacts you, but what impacts your property as well. Mice can get in and eat air filters or chew through belts or hurt your property in other ways. Wildlife on the road. I've had many instances of either near collisions or collisions with deer on the road. It could be damaging for livestock. The deer got into one of my hay bales here that I feed my horses with. So there is a risk that I lose food for my horses because of wildlife. And then if we look at, let's take that example and think about the controls again. So when is the risk higher for wildlife, for deer collisions on the road? Well, dusk and dawn. So a way to reduce that risk, let's change the probability. If I don't travel at dusk or dawn, I have decreased the risk of hitting a deer because I've decreased the probability. I am not driving when it's a higher likelihood that I will hit a deer. So if that's an option, that's something I could do. If weather warnings go out and it's snowing and blizzarding or there's icy conditions, they recommend people stay home. Don't drive unless necessary. Why? Because that decreases the risk of you being involved in an accident or being stranded because you're not driving. You're decreasing the probability. Other hazards for me, weather. So hail, heat, cold, wind, tornado, drought, excessive rain, fires in my home, maybe in a vehicle, grass fires, forest fires, cyber. Now, it could impact me by if the cyber criminals take out a critical utility, that could impact me, or it could be personally against me. I could have a ransomware on my computer or have my identity stolen or things like that. People can be a hazard, either through crime, so trespassing, theft, um, vandalism, assault, or it could be overreach, right? People in positions of authority exercising undue control over me and my life. Those are hazards. Wildlife, how could it affect me? Well, again, driving. How can I control it? What can I do? Again, time of day. So I look at that. I can alter when I'm driving. Speed. If I am driving at dusk or dawn, and it's a higher risk of wildlife collisions, I reduce my speed because that changes both the probability, I have more reaction time, the animal has more reaction time, and the impact. So I have had a couple of bumps with deer over the past year, but again, I was going slow already and I was virtually stopped by the time I bumped into them. They got up, ran off. No damage to the vehicle, no damage that I could see to the animal. You could have good tires, right? Make sure your vehicle is in good condition. Have your lights on. Put them physically on. Don't just rely on the fog lights or whatever automatic your vehicle does. Take some responsibility and put your lights on. You could have deterrents on your vehicle, like those little whistles you can put on your bumper to help make the animal aware of your vehicle. To your person, right? Well, you could carry bear spray. I always, if I'm if there's a higher risk of bears, if one of the neighbors calls and says, hey, there's a bear we just saw by your property, maybe I'll carry bear spray on me. I always have a whistle on me. Make some noise. Let it know I'm there. Scare it off. You might need a gun. Maybe fencing, larger fencing or more robust fencing on certain areas to try and keep them out or keep them away from things. Wildlife can impact your livestock, again, by direct, say, attack on your livestock, fox against chickens or a cougar or a bear against your horses or cows, or by mice eating the food for your livestock or spreading disease. For your pets, there can be, for your food storage, to your garden, to your equipment. Lots of hazards and risks. Weather. So temperature, drought, severe rain, flooding, hail, tornadoes, strong wind. There's lots, and there's lots of information relatively available for your area. Here's a few things that I look at. So Cochrane, that's not far from my place. So I look at that, and here's your average temperatures. So if I have this information, this can help me determine my risk because I can see when it's either too hot or too cold for certain activities, or when I need to change my kits. So to put my summer kit or my winter kit in my vehicle, this helps me with that information. I can plan for heating requirements. Wind. So here I can see when the wind is stronger and when it is weaker. So this might help me both avoid damage and hazards by knowing, okay, I might want to not do certain activities, putting up a barn. Maybe I'll do it when it's not as windy versus windy. Or if I'm going to do something positive, like install a wind turbine to generate electricity, now this helps me plan that as well. So positives and negatives. Humidity, precipitation, rainfall versus snowfall. So again, I can start to understand when am I going to have a higher risk of flooding, or when would be an ideal time. If I want to have my rain collection system in place by a certain time, maybe I'd like to have it in place by April. Make that as one of my first projects to get the rain collection system ready for that rainfall throughout May, June, July, instead of building it in September and then saying, okay, now I don't really have any collection for a while. Sunshine hours, sunshine days, UV index. This might help me plan, is it beneficial to put in solar, or when will I generate the most electricity? If you're a ginger like myself, when do I have to be more aware? When is my risk higher of getting a sunburn? And what controls can I put in place for that? Sunscreen, long sleeve shirts, wide brim hat, don't spend as much time outside, things like that. So there's good and bad things we can use this for. Lightning. So here's just a map of lightning strikes, and also a graph of the time of day when it's most prevalent. So again, if I was going to put up a large tower or do some work outside, and I thought, all right, I can look here and I can see that maybe, between, let's say 5 and 9 p.m. is when the most lightning strikes occur. So I know my risk is higher at those times. Hail, very big issue in this area is hail damage. So just being aware of that might help you. How can I control that? Well, maybe you change your construction style. If you're putting up a building or doing a roof replacement instead of asphalt shingles, maybe you use something a little bit stronger. Maybe you go to a metal cladding, or upgrade the type of siding you're putting on that's more hail resistant. Lots of things you can do. Fire. Fire is one that everyone has probably experienced it in some degree or knows someone who has. So we have to plan for that. It could be a house fire, vehicle fire, grass fire, forest fire. There's information on the prevalence of that online. You can get information from insurance companies as well. And what controls can we put in place? Well, fire extinguishers in our home, in our vehicle, maybe doing fire smart principles for your property, getting training on how to properly use a fire extinguisher, being aware when you're having campfires of steps you can take to help prevent fires. Earthquakes. Here's earthquakes in Alberta. Now, a lot of people don't think we get a lot of earthquakes, but there have been a number of earthquakes. And as you can see here, this is stats from 1985 to 2005. There were 19 average earthquakes per year. From 2006 to 2018, we went up to 165 earthquakes a year in Alberta. So think about those things. And if you're in, for example, British Columbia, so on the west coast or in the west of the US, the Cascadia Fault is a big one. And if that slips, it's going to be bad news. So be aware of that. And what can you do to help decrease probability or impact? Cyber, identity theft, ransomware, critical infrastructure attacks, banking compromise. Some of these things you can't do much about. Some things you can. Identity theft, you can be as careful, as you can be. There's steps you can personally take. Ransomware as well. There's things you can do. Critical infrastructure attacks. Well, you can either have backups in place for yourself, or you can be a little bit more proactive and maybe do some petitioning to your electrical company or to government representatives, if you think that'll do you any good, to actually put more security in place and to have them step up their game on things. Banking compromise. You can have cash on hand if the banks go down. You can use multiple institutions. So if one bank gets compromised, maybe you have another one that's not. Or, as we saw during some events, when banks limit the amount of money you can withdraw. If you have accounts in multiple banks, you can get out more cash and still be below their restriction limits. So there's things you can do. Nuclear fallout. Again, it's looking at what are your hazards. So by looking at the map I've got on screen here, for those that can't see it, if you're just listening to this, let's say that in Montana, that all the silos, the missile silos are targets, and they will be. So if they get nuked, the fallout, if you look at the prevailing wind patterns, wouldn't impact Alberta or British Columbia as much as Saskatchewan or Manitoba. So again, you look at what your risks and hazards are, and you can find information, and there are steps to prepare and take control of that and put mitigation in place. People. Well, it could be the traditional concept of trespasser, thieves, vandalism, murderers, basically anyone that is against your way of thinking you might consider to be a hazard. There might be risks around that, so not our type of people, for example. But then look at political overreach. Is the area that you live in very restrictive in what they allow you to do? You might think that's good, you might think that's bad. Maybe you look at your elected representatives and say, I don't know why we're getting these people in here. Maybe you're for it, maybe you're against it. What can you do? Well, there's things you can do. You can get active, you can become involved, you can vote, you can, maybe try and put forward your own candidate. Lots of things you can do. You're never powerless. Take responsibility. Crime maps. There's lots of availability online of crime maps, so you can look at what's common in this area, what's prevalent, how often does it happen, what's the frequency. Lots of information you can look at. This helps you plan. The human terrain. So looking at, the people in your area. What's their age, gender, marital status, race, religion, education, income level. What's their nationality, their ethnicity? What's their family status? What's their occupation? All those demographics help you to understand possible hazards and risks from people in your area, and it allows you to plan accordingly. Multi-hazard prepping, that's something we want to look at. You always want to make the most of limited resources. So when we think of all hazards prepping or all hazards emergency management, that doesn't mean you have a plan or things like that for each and every single hazard. Because hazards are just hazards. You have to look at the risks in your critical functions to really hone in on these things. So things that you're going to have for any event is knowledge of the event, right? You have to be aware of it. So expanding your network, your monitoring, your awareness, that will help you for any event. Communications. Again, you have to be able to receive communications to be aware of things, and you have to be able to communicate or transmit to get help or things like that. Gear, so resources, equipment, money, basic needs, air, shelter, water, food, security. You plan for those things, you'll have the basics covered. Critical functions. So if you can look at these, you'll be well off in being prepared for anything. So air, shelter, water, food, cooking, replenishment. If you look at all of these things and be prepared for that, you'll be in good spot. So water, storage bottles, barrels, tanks, cistern, replenishment of water, well, rain, rivers, lakes, ponds. Food. Do you have storage? 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months. Replenishment. I shop, I grow, I hunt, I trap, I forage. Cooking. Normally I use my stove. If I don't have that, I'll use a camp stove or a barbecue or campfire or solar. Communications. We want to talk to our families and friends. For work, we need it. For awareness, if help is needed. Normally you might use cell phones or internet. Backup might be walkie-talkies, CB radios, ham, a different internet provider, a different cell provider. Go to a friend's place. Different ways to address that. Health. You want to look at your physical health, exercise, nutrition, sleep. Financial health. Do you have an emergency fund? Investing. Do you do debt reduction? Do you have multiple streams of income? Mental health. Keep learning. Network. Your faith, your social aspects, all very important. Risk. Financial might be job loss, money issues, interruption to your critical functions. Well, you need the job for water, food, and shelter. Loss of power would impact your work. Loss of income. So you look at that. What can you do? How do you decrease the risks? Risk of a power outage would be no refrigeration. So your food might spoil, your medications might go bad. ATMs or point of sale machines are down, so you can't get cash. Internet's down, so your work and comms, all your how-to manuals that you threw out because you want to get them online, you can't get those anymore. Phone charging, no cooking, no EV charging, all risks. The PACE kind of methodology is to say primary, alternative, contingency, emergency for each of these things. So power loss, your primary is the grid, your alternative might be solar to batteries. Contingency, a generator to batteries. Emergency, a second generator, or battery bricks for your cell phones. Again, the PACE plan, let's look at illumination or lights. You might say, well, my primary, if I need a light, is the light on my cell phone. Alternative, I've got a little keychain light. Contingency, I have a headlamp in my car. Emergency, I've got a big flashlight in my trunk. Controls for water. Primary might be your water from a well or from a city utility. Alternative might be a cistern, or maybe you go to a friend's place. If your water's out, maybe theirs isn't. Contingency, maybe you get water trucked in or you have backup barrel of water in your basement. Emergency might be going to a friend's place, leaving the community, more backup, water, things like that. Controls for food. If your primary is grocery store, your alternative might be a small garden or your own chickens. A contingency might be your own stockpile. Emergency might be turning to your network to help get food or hunting or foraging. Cooking. Your primary is electric stove. Your alternative is a propane barbecue. Your contingency is a camping stove, and your emergency is an outdoor fire. Well, there we have it. That's the end of this presentation. And again, it just looks at what are your hazards? What are the risks associated with that? And what controls can you put in place to make your risk lower, to decrease the probability or the impact? There's lots of information on there. Sometimes the problem is finding information you trust or someone you trust to listen to. But just remember that there's always things you can do. Not making a choice to do anything, you have made a choice. You've made a choice to just accept it and not do anything. That may or may not be the best choice. So there's always something you can do. Take responsibility, take control, start taking steps,